The strange mare in the woods. Jack was a simple farmer, living in a quiet village surrounded by thick woods. He enjoyed his peaceful life, tending to his crops and taking care of his small farm. One chilly evening, as the sun dipped below the horizon, he decided to take a walk in the forest to gather firewood. The woods were dense and dark, with only the faint sound of rustling leaves and chirping crickets breaking the silence. Jack moved carefully, his lantern casting a soft glow around him. As he bent down to pick up a fallen branch, he heard a strange sound, a soft neigh, but it didn't sound like any horse he had ever heard. Curious, Jack followed the sound deeper into the forest. The air grew colder, and the trees seemed to close in around him. After a few minutes he saw her. A mare stood in a small clearing, bathed in the moonlight. Her coat was sleek and shiny, a deep silvery gray that shimmered like the surface of a calm lake. Strange glowing patterns ran along her sides, faint but mesmerizing. Her eyes, large and bright, seemed to hold a mysterious intelligence. Jack stood frozen for a moment, unsure of what to do. "What are you doing out here, girl?" he murmured, stepping closer. The mare didn't run. She simply watched him, her head tilted slightly, almost as if she understood his words. Feeling brave, Jack reached out slowly. The mare didn't flinch. He placed his hand gently on her neck, surprised at how warm her coat felt despite the cold night. "You're not from around here, are you?" he said with a chuckle. The mare let out a soft snort, almost as if she was laughing at his joke. Jack glanced around, wondering if she belonged to someone. There was no saddle, no rope, and no signs of another person nearby. She looked well-fed and healthy, not like a horse that had been lost or abandoned. Strange, Jack muttered to himself. He decided to take her back to his farm for the night. She was too unique, too valuable to leave in the woods. Maybe she belonged to a traveler who had lost her, or perhaps she was a wild horse from far away. Either way, Jack knew he couldn't just leave her there. He led the mare back to his farm, surprised at how easily she followed him. She didn't pull away or resist, walking beside him like a loyal companion. As they reached the edge of the woods, Jack noticed something odd. Her glowing markings seemed to fade when they left the forest, disappearing completely by the time they reached his barn. Jack scratched his head, puzzled. "Must have been a trick of the moonlight," he said to himself, though he wasn't entirely convinced. Inside the barn, he prepared a comfortable spot for the mare. She stood quietly, watching him as he worked. Her eyes followed his every move, sharp and alert. Jack couldn't shake the feeling that there was something unusual about her. Later that night, as Jack lay in bed, he couldn't stop thinking about the mare. The way she appeared in the woods, her strange glowing patterns, and the way she seemed to understand him. It was all too strange. He tried to convince himself it was nothing, just his imagination running wild. But deep down, he knew there was more to her than met the eye. In the middle of the night, Jack was woken by a strange sound. It was a low hum, almost like the vibration of a distant engine. He sat up, his heart racing, and looked out the window. The barn was still, and the mare was standing just outside, her silvery coat glowing faintly in the darkness. Jack grabbed his lantern and hurried outside. As he approached, the humming stopped. The mare turned to look at him, her eyes shining like twin stars. Jack felt a shiver run down his spine. "What are you?" he whispered, his voice barely audible. The mare didn't answer, of course. She simply walked back into the barn and lay down in the hay. Jack stood there for a long moment, staring at her. He felt like he was standing on the edge of something vast and unknown, a mystery far beyond his understanding. Eventually, he returned to his bed, though sleep didn't come easily. The image of the glowing mare and the strange hum stayed with him, haunting his thoughts. Jack had a feeling his life was about to change in ways he couldn't imagine. As dawn broke, Jack decided he would keep the mare for now. He would figure out where she came from, and who, if anyone, she belonged to. But deep down, he wondered if she had chosen him for a reason. Little did he know, The mare was no ordinary horse. She was watching him just as closely as he was watching her, and she wasn't from this world. Whispers of the forest. As the days passed, Jack couldn't stop thinking about the strange mare. She had become a part of his life, though he still didn't fully understand her. Every morning, he would feed her, and every evening, he would visit her in the barn. The mare, whom Jack had started calling Silver because of her shimmering coat, had become more than just an animal to him. There was something about her, something that he couldn't put his finger on. But as much as he tried to focus on his daily tasks, he couldn't shake the feeling that something wasn't right. The villagers had started to notice the mare too, and they weren't as friendly about it as Jack had hoped. It started with the old man, Farmer Jacobs. One morning, as Jack was walking through the village to the market, Jacob stopped him. "That horse you've got there, Jack, it's not from around here. I've seen horses before, and that one's got eyes that don't look normal." Jack laughed, trying to ease the old farmer's concerns. "Oh, it's just a mare I found in the woods. She's a bit odd, sure, but nothing to worry about." Jacobs didn't seem convinced. "You best be careful, Jack. There's talk among the elders about strange things happening in these woods. People see lights at night, hear voices where there shouldn't be any. Be careful what you bring into your barn." Jack brushed it off, telling himself that the old man was just getting paranoid. But over the next few days, the whispers in the village grew louder. People avoided Silver when they passed by the barn, some even crossing the street to stay away from her. One evening, as Jack led the mare out to the fields, he saw a group of villagers standing at a distance, watching. They spoke in low voices, their eyes fixed on Silver. Jack didn't like the way they were staring at her, like she was something to be feared. "What's going on with everyone, Silver?" Jack muttered, scratching her neck. The mare nickered softly, but her gaze never wavered from the villagers. Jack couldn't help but feel like she understood what they were saying. As the weeks went on, Jack noticed more strange things. At night, when he went to check on Silver, he sometimes saw lights flickering in the distance. They weren't from any campfires, and they didn't look like stars. They seemed to hover and move, like something was watching from above. One night, he even heard a faint humming sound, like the one he had heard the night he first found Silver, but it was coming from the direction of the woods. Jack's curiosity got the better of him. He decided to follow the lights one evening, just to see what was going on. He made sure to stay hidden in the shadows, not wanting to draw attention to himself. The path through the woods was dark and overgrown, but Jack was determined. He had to know what was happening. The deeper he went, the stranger things became. The air felt thick, and there was an eerie quiet, as if the forest itself was holding its breath. He followed the flickering lights for what seemed like hours, until he finally reached a small clearing. In the center of the clearing, a soft blue light hovered, glowing faintly. As Jack stepped closer, the light vanished, leaving only the dark trees and the strange hum that seemed to vibrate through the air. For a moment, Jack stood frozen, his heart racing. What was that? Suddenly, he heard a rustling behind him. He spun around, but there was nothing there, just the shadowy outline of trees and the sound of his own breathing. Jack felt a chill run down his spine. "Get a hold of yourself," he muttered, trying to calm his nerves. But just as he turned to leave, something caught his eye. There, standing just beyond the edge of the clearing, was Silver. But this wasn't the same mare he had brought back to his farm. This one was different. Her eyes glowed brighter, and her body seemed to shimmer with an otherworldly light. She stood still, watching him with those same intelligent eyes. But now there was something else in her gaze. It was almost like she was waiting for him to understand something. Jack's heart skipped a beat. "Silver," he called out softly. The mare stepped forward, and Jack felt a strange pull toward her. He didn't know why, but he found himself walking toward her, as if guided by some invisible force. As he approached, the hum grew louder, vibrating in his chest. It was almost as if the very ground was alive with energy. When Jack was only a few feet away, Silver lowered her head, and the glow around her intensified. For a moment, Jack thought he saw something in the glow, something metallic and alien. He blinked, and the vision disappeared. But the feeling of unease didn't. He stepped back. "What is going on, Silver?" The mare didn't answer, of course, but she turned and started walking toward the woods, pausing only to look over her shoulder at Jack. Her eyes beckoned him to follow. Jack hesitated for a moment, but the curiosity burning inside him was too strong. He followed her through the woods, his heart pounding in his chest. The trees seemed to part as they walked, the path ahead clearing as if guiding him toward something. But what? As they reached the edge of the forest, Jack caught sight of something he hadn't seen before. There in the distance was a strange, glowing object hovering in the sky. It was round and shimmering, casting a soft blue light over the trees. Jack's breath caught in his throat. He didn't know what it was, but he knew one thing for sure. He was no longer just dealing with a strange mare. Something far bigger was at play. As Silver paused, looking up at the object in the sky, Jack realized that whatever had brought her to him was far more than he could ever have imagined. And he was about to discover just how deep this mystery went. The hidden message. The days following that strange night in the woods were filled with confusion and a deep sense of unease. Jack couldn't stop thinking about what he had seen. Silver's transformation, the strange hum, and the glowing object in the sky. His life had never been the same since the moment he found the mare, and each passing day only seemed to add more questions. Despite his growing concern, Jack continued to care for Silver, though a part of him wondered if he should let her go, if only to bring peace back to his life. But every time he thought about parting with her, something stopped him. She wasn't just a horse. She was something else, something he couldn't explain. One morning, as Jack was brushing Silver in the barn, he noticed something unusual. As he ran his fingers along her sleek coat, he felt a small, hard object beneath the surface. His heart skipped. What was this? He carefully parted the mare's thick fur, revealing a small metallic object embedded in her skin. It was like a thin piece of metal, about the size of a coin, shaped in an intricate design. At first, Jack thought it was just a piece of old jewelry or some kind of trinket that had become lodged in her coat. But when he touched it, a faint hum ran through his fingertips, sending a shiver down his spine. The metallic object glowed briefly in response to his touch, and Jack jerked his hand away, his heart pounding. "What the hell is this?" he whispered, staring down at the strange artifact. Silver, standing still as always, didn't react. It was as if she had expected him to find it, as if she was waiting for him to understand. But Jack was far from understanding anything. He didn't know what to make of this new discovery, or what it meant for the mare he had come to care for. Without knowing what else to do, Jack decided to take the object to Old Man Jacobs, the village elder, hoping he might recognize it, or at least offer some insight. The villagers had always said that Jacobs knew things beyond the understanding of most people. The elder's home was at the edge of the village, a small cottage covered in ivy and wildflowers. When Jack knocked on the door, Jacobs greeted him with a knowing look, as though he had been expecting him. "Ah, Jack, I see you found it." Jacobs motioned for him to come in. Jack hesitated but then stepped inside, handing the strange metal piece to the old man. Jacobs turned it over in his hands, his wrinkled brow furrowing as he examined it. "Where did you find this?" he asked, his voice serious. I found it in Silver's coat. I don't know what it is, but when I touched it, it hummed," Jack explained, his voice shaky. "I think it's connected to her." Jacobs didn't respond immediately. He studied the object carefully, turning it under the light as if searching for something hidden. Finally, he spoke. "This is not of this world, Jack," Jacobs said quietly. "This is alien. It's a message, a signal." Jack's heart raced. Alien. He had heard rumors, of course, but he never believed them. Now, standing in the dimly lit room with the strange metal object in his hand, he couldn't deny the truth of Jacob's words. Alien? Jack repeated, trying to wrap his mind around it. What does that mean? What's it doing with Silver? Jacobs glanced at him, his expression grave. This isn't just a horse, Jack. She's something far more important. And you've just found the key. The key to what? Jack asked, his voice trembling. Her people are looking for her, Jacobs said, setting the object down on the table. And they will come for her soon. You need to be ready. Jack felt a chill run down his spine. Her people? What do you mean? Who is she really? Jacob sighed, his old eyes clouded with a mixture of fear and wisdom. The mare you found, Jack, she's not just a runaway animal. She's a princess from another world. Her people sent her here to escape their enemies, but they've been tracking her ever since. The signal you found is a beacon, a way for them to locate her, to bring her home. But there are others, dangerous ones, who are also tracking the signal. They want her, and they'll stop at nothing to find her. Jack's mind was spinning. He couldn't believe what he was hearing. Princess? Alien? It sounded like something out of a science fiction story, but the reality of the situation was sinking in. Silver wasn't just a strange mare. She was something extraordinary. How do you know all of this? Jack asked. Jacobs leaned forward, his voice lowering to a whisper. I've seen things, Jack. Strange things. The lights in the sky, the whispers in the forest. I've heard the stories from travelers, from those who've seen what's out there. And I've seen the mark. The same symbol you found in Silver's coat. It's ancient, and it's connected to a powerful civilization that exists far beyond our stars. Jack was silent for a moment, trying to process everything. He had always thought the world was a simple place, full of small problems and small victories. But now, everything had changed. What do we do now? Jack asked, his voice barely more than a whisper. Jacob stood up, his face hardening with resolve. Now, you protect her. Keep her safe. Her people will come, but so will the others. And when they do, you'll need to make a choice. You'll need to decide what side you're on. Jack looked at Silver, who was standing quietly in the barn, her eyes glowing faintly in the dim light. He could feel the weight of the decision pressing on him, and for the first time, he realized just how much responsibility he had taken on. Silver wasn't just a mare. She was a princess, an alien princess, and her arrival on Earth was no accident. Jack was caught in something far bigger than himself, and whether he liked it or not, his life was about to change forever. And so, with a deep breath, Jack made his choice. He would protect Silver. Whatever came next, he would face it head-on. The reveal. The days following Jack's discovery of Silver's true nature were filled with a sense of urgency. He no longer saw the mare simply as an odd animal. She was something far more significant, something caught in a cosmic struggle between powerful forces. Jack couldn't shake the feeling that he had been chosen for a purpose, though he still didn't fully understand why or how. One thing was certain. Silver's arrival on Earth was not a random event. And now, her enemies were closing in. It was late one evening when the tension finally snapped. Jack had been working late in the fields, trying to push through his exhaustion, when a strange feeling washed over him. The air felt thick, as though the very atmosphere was charged with an unknown energy. It made his skin tingle, and he instinctively looked up at the sky. At first, he thought it was just a trick of the light, the moon shining too brightly, casting strange shadows across the land. But then he saw them. A fleet of dark shapes, silent, fast-moving ships, darted across the sky like shadows, their sleek forms cutting through the night. There were no lights, no sound, just the unnatural speed of their movement. Jack's heart raced as he realized that these weren't just ordinary aircraft. They were something far beyond anything Earth had ever seen. Panicking, he ran back to the barn, where Silver stood waiting. She didn't react when he entered, as if she had been expecting him. But when Jack's eyes met hers, he saw something new in her expression, an ancient sadness mixed with resolve. She seemed to know what was coming. The humming sound that Jack had heard so many nights before began to fill the air again. It was louder now, like a low, vibrating pulse that seemed to shake the ground beneath his feet. Jack stepped forward, his breath shallow. "Silver, what's happening?" The mare turned to face him, her eyes glowing even brighter in the dim light of the barn. For a moment, Jack thought he saw something flicker behind her eyes, like a flash of a distant memory, an entire civilization in a brief instant. But the moment passed, and she lowered her head. "I don't understand," Jack whispered. But before he could ask more, there was a loud thud from outside, followed by the sound of heavy footsteps. Jack's heart dropped into his stomach. He wasn't alone. The barn door slammed open with a force that shook the wooden walls. Standing in the doorway were 3 men, their figures tall and imposing, dressed in dark, military-like gear. Their faces were hidden behind helmets, and they radiated a cold, calculating presence that sent chills down Jack's spine. "Get out of the way, human," one of the figures growled, his voice distorted through a mask. "This doesn't concern you." Jack stepped back instinctively, his mind racing. He didn't know who these people were, but he could feel the danger in the air. They weren't just looking for Silver, they were hunting her. "No," Jack said, his voice more steady than he felt. "She's not going anywhere with you." The figure in the front raised a hand, signaling the others to advance. The atmosphere inside the barn grew thick with tension, and Jack could see Silver's body tense, her legs slightly shifting as if preparing to act. "Move, or we'll make you move," the masked man threatened. But Jack stood firm. He was scared, but something in him refused to back down. Silver was no longer just an odd mare. She was a princess, and she was under his protection. Without warning, Silver made her move. She reared up, her body glowing with an otherworldly light, as if the very energy of the stars was coursing through her. The men froze for a moment, clearly not expecting this level of resistance. But they quickly recovered, reaching for their weapons. "Get her," one of them shouted. The battle that followed was swift and chaotic. Silver charged at the first soldier, knocking him back with a force that sent him sprawling to the ground. Her speed and strength were beyond anything Jack had ever seen. She was not just a creature of this earth, she was a being from another world, and it was clear she was more than capable of defending herself. But the soldiers weren't going to give up so easily. They fought back, their weapons flashing as they tried to subdue her. One of the men pulled out a long, sleek gun and aimed it at Silver, firing a bolt of energy that struck her directly in the side. Jack gasped as he saw the mare stumble slightly, the energy blast leaving a glowing burn on her coat. "No," Jack shouted, running toward her. His heart raced as he watched her struggle, but Silver was not weak. With a powerful movement, she kicked out, sending the soldier flying backwards. The fight continued, but Jack could tell they were outmatched. Silver was fast, strong, and agile, but the soldiers had technology on their side. Jack knew they wouldn't give up. They couldn't. Suddenly, there was a loud crackle in the air, and a burst of energy shot down from the sky. The barn seemed to glow for a moment, and the soldiers stopped, their weapons lowering slightly as they looked toward the source of the energy. Jack turned, his breath catching in his throat. A large, gleaming ship hovered just above the ground, its surface shimmering with a soft blue light. The ship was unlike anything Jack had ever seen, a smooth metallic surface that seemed to pulse with power. It was magnificent, yet terrifying in its sheer presence. From the ship, a figure emerged, tall and regal, wearing shimmering armor that caught the light of the stars. As the figure stepped forward, the soldiers dropped to their knees, bowing their heads. "Princess Lyra," one of the men muttered, his voice filled with fear. Jack stared in disbelief. Princess Lyra. This was the mare, Silver. She was a princess, a royal being from another world. The soldiers had been hunting her, but she had been waiting for her people to come. And now, they had arrived. "Jack," the princess's voice rang out, soft but powerful. "You have done well. You have protected me when no one else would." The soldiers stood, and the leader of the group spoke. "We apologize, Your Highness. We were only following orders." His voice trembled. Silver, or rather Princess Lyra, looked at him with a cold gaze. "Your orders have brought you here, but it is not too late for you to choose a different path. I do not belong to you." The princess turned to Jack, her eyes filled with gratitude and something deeper, something unspoken. Jack realized then that his life had changed forever. He wasn't just a farmer anymore. He was a part of something far greater than he could ever have imagined. "You've protected me, Jack," Lyra said, stepping closer to him. "And now, I will protect you." The chase begins. The quiet rural life Jack had once known felt like a distant memory. After the battle in the barn and the arrival of Princess Lyra's ship, everything had shifted. The world Jack thought he understood had opened up into a vast, dangerous place. Silver, no, Lyra, wasn't just an alien princess. She was part of a much larger struggle. And Jack had found himself at the very heart of it. That night, as Lyra stood with him outside the barn, the glowing ship above them casting a soft light on their surroundings, Jack felt both awe and fear. He had done what he could to protect her, but the battle was far from over. The soldiers were only the beginning. Worse, they weren't the only ones searching for Lyra. Lyra looked at Jack, her gaze firm yet filled with gratitude. "Jack, they're not the only ones hunting me. There are others, far worse. If they find us, everything we'd fought for will be lost." Her voice was steady, but the worry in her eyes was undeniable. "What do we do now?" Jack asked, his heart racing. He had always been just a farmer, tending to crops and animals. He never imagined he would be standing next to an alien princess, about to become a part of an intergalactic war. "We run," Lyra said, her voice low. "We have to leave Earth. My people are coming, but we're not the only ones who know about this planet. There are others, rogues, bounty hunters, mercenaries, who will stop at nothing to capture me. And they won't care who gets hurt in the process." Jack nodded. He understood now. Lyra wasn't just a victim in a cosmic struggle. She was a key player in a conflict that stretched across the stars. The stakes were higher than anything he had ever imagined. And the danger wasn't just for Lyra anymore. It was for everyone on Earth. "Where will we go?" Jack asked. "How will we escape them?" Lyra turned her gaze toward the ship above them, her eyes scanning the horizon. "I have a contact, someone who can help us, but we must move quickly. Time is running out." With that, they made their way toward the ship, Jack's mind still spinning from everything that had happened. As they entered the ship, he couldn't help but feel a sense of awe. The interior was unlike anything he had ever seen. Sleek, metallic walls that seemed to hum with energy, a soft, pulsing light filling the space. It was clear that this was no ordinary spacecraft. This was a vessel of advanced technology, and Jack was now inside it. "Are you sure you're ready for this?" Lyra asked, her voice steady but filled with an underlying concern. Jack looked at her, his resolve hardening. "I don't know what's out there, but I'll help you. I don't want to sit by and do nothing." Lyra smiled, a hint of warmth in her eyes. "You're braver than most, Jack. I'm glad I found you." Before Jack could respond, the ship's engines hummed to life, the ground beneath them vibrating as the craft lifted off the ground. The view outside the ship's windows was breathtaking. Earth shrinking beneath them as they soared into the sky, the planet slowly turning into a small blue marble in the vastness of space. But their brief moment of awe was short-lived. As the ship climbed higher, Jack saw something in the distance, a dark shape against the stars. It was large, too large to be just a satellite or debris. It was moving fast, much faster than anything Jack had ever seen. He realized with a shock that it wasn't a ship from Lyra's people. "They found us," Lyra said, her voice tight with urgency. "It's them. The rogues." Jack's heart raced. The ship, Whatever it was getting closer with alarming speed. Can we outrun them? I'm not sure, Lyra admitted, her eyes narrowing in concentration as she began to input commands into the ship's control panel. They're equipped with technology that's faster than anything we have. But I can try. The ship's interior shifted as Lyra initiated evasive maneuvers, her hands moving with precision as she guided the craft through a series of rapid turns. Jack could feel the intense acceleration as they darted through space, narrowly avoiding the pursuing ship. But the rogue ship was relentless. It followed them, matching their every move, and Jack could hear the low hum of its engines growing louder. The space around them was filled with the tense hum of battle as the two ships darted through the stars like predators chasing prey. We need to make it to the warp gate, Lyra said, her voice strained. It's our only chance. Jack didn't fully understand what a warp gate was, but he knew that it was their best hope. As Lyra pushed the ship to its limits, Jack braced himself for whatever was to come. His life had already changed beyond recognition, and now he was part of something far bigger than he had ever imagined. The rogue ship launched a series of energy blasts toward them, and Jack instinctively ducked, his heart hammering in his chest. The blasts missed, but only by inches, and the ship jolted violently from the near hits. The stars outside the window seemed to streak by faster as the two ships entered a high-speed chase that felt like it could go on forever. This is it, Lyra said suddenly, her voice grim. Brace yourself, Jack. We're going to need to make a jump through the gate. If we're not fast enough, they'll catch us before we can activate it. Jack clenched his fists, his nerves on edge. This wasn't just a fight for survival anymore. It was a fight to keep everything he loved safe, to keep Lyra safe. The rogue ship was still closing in, and they didn't have much time left. Lyra's hands flew over the control panel, and the ship's engines roared as they entered the warp gate's coordinates. The stars outside twisted and warped, and the space around them seemed to bend as they pushed the ship to its limit. With a final desperate surge of power, the ship vanished into the gate, the rogue ship hot on their trail. For a moment, everything went silent. The chase was over, at least for now. They had entered the unknown. Jack let out a breath he hadn't realized he was holding, but he knew this was only the beginning. They had escaped one danger, but the war was far from over. The chase had only just begun. Jack's choice. The stars outside the ship blurred together as Lyra expertly navigated the ship through the warp gate. Jack, still gripping his seat, could feel the gravity of their situation sinking in. He had barely caught his breath from the chase when the ship emerged from the gate, and a vast, unfamiliar star system lay before them. This wasn't just another corner of the universe. It was a place far removed from Earth, a place that Jack had never imagined could exist. As the ship settled into a safer orbit around a distant planet, Lyra let out a deep breath, her fingers still hovering over the controls. Her eyes were tired, but there was something else in them, a deep weariness that only someone who had been running from danger for too long could understand. Jack could see it now more clearly than ever. Lyra wasn't just a princess, a leader of her people. She was a survivor, someone who had seen things Jack could never even dream of. And now she was asking him to be a part of it. Jack, Lyra said quietly, turning to him. Her voice had an edge of sadness now, as if the weight of what she was about to say had been building for a long time. We can't keep running. Sooner or later, they'll catch up with us. The rogues. They'll stop at nothing to get me back. And when they do, they'll use me to wage a war that will destroy everything I fought to protect. Jack didn't know what to say. He had never expected any of this. None of it was in the plan. He had thought he was just helping an alien mare who had wandered into his life. But now, he was a key player in an intergalactic struggle between civilizations, with the fate of entire worlds hanging in the balance. Lyra's eyes softened as she saw the uncertainty in his gaze. You don't have to choose this path, Jack. You can go back to Earth. You can live your life. But I can't go back there, not without risking everything. The people I left behind, my family, my kingdom, they are in grave danger. And the war, the one that's been tearing my people apart, is only going to escalate. Jack looked at her, the weight of her words sinking in. He could feel the pull in his chest, the responsibility he now carried. His life on Earth was simple. He knew the land, the rhythms of the seasons, the quiet nights. But this was something else, something he couldn't ignore. A choice had been laid before him, a choice between his old life and something much bigger than anything he could have imagined. "Why me?" Jack asked, his voice hoarse. "Why did you choose me?" Lyra's expression softened, and she took a step closer. "I didn't choose you, Jack. You chose to help me, when no one else would. When the others would have let me die, you stood by me. That's why I trust you." Jack stared at her, unsure of how to respond. The truth was, he had no real experience with anything like this. He wasn't a hero, wasn't prepared for an interstellar war. But deep inside, something had changed. Lyra wasn't just some alien princess, a random being in his life. She had become someone he cared about deeply. She had opened his eyes to a world beyond Earth, a world filled with both beauty and destruction. "I'm just a farmer, Lyra," Jack said, his voice trembling. "I don't know anything about fighting wars, about leading people. I'm not like you. I can't be what you need." Lyra reached out, her hand gentle on his shoulder. "That's what makes you different. You're not bound by politics or power. You see the world as it is, and you understand what's worth fighting for. That's why I need you." Jack swallowed hard, the weight of her words pressing down on him. Could he really leave behind everything he knew, everything he loved, to fight a war that wasn't his, to take on a role that he had never asked for? Suddenly, the ship's systems chimed, pulling Jack out of his thoughts. A warning light blinked on the control panel in front of Lyra, and she quickly began typing commands into the ship's console. "What's happening?" Jack asked, his heart racing again. "They found us," Lyra said, her voice cold now, the determination returning to her eyes. "The rogues. They've tracked us through the gate. They're coming." Jack felt a rush of panic rise in his chest. He looked at Lyra, who was already preparing for the battle ahead. She had been through so much already. She was the one who had led her people, who had run and fought, who had survived. But Jack wasn't sure he could keep up. He wasn't sure he was ready for what was coming. "Jack," Lyra said, looking at him one last time before turning her attention back to the controls. "This is your choice. You can stay here. You can help me. But the path ahead won't be easy. There's no turning back once we face them." Jack stood there for a moment, his mind racing. The life he had known was gone, swept away by the presence of Silver, the alien princess, and the war that had followed her. There was no going back to his farm, no retreating into the quiet life he had once known. For the first time, Jack realized that he had already made his choice. He had chosen to protect Lyra. He had chosen to fight. "I'm with you," he said, his voice steady despite the storm of emotions swirling inside him. "I'll help you." Lyra gave him a slight, grateful smile, and the two of them locked eyes. There was no turning back now. The battle was coming, and Jack was ready to face it, side by side with the alien princess who had changed his life forever. A new dawn. The decision had been made. Jack was no longer just a farmer from Earth. He was now a participant in an intergalactic struggle, standing beside Princess Lyra, ready to face whatever challenges awaited. The rogues were coming, and the weight of the moment pressed heavily on him. But even in the face of overwhelming odds, Jack felt a sense of clarity he hadn't known before. There was no turning back. The war had come to his doorstep, and now it would be his fight too. The ship lurched slightly as Lyra engaged the engines, preparing for the inevitable confrontation. Outside, the vastness of space stretched before them, silent and endless. In the distance, Jack could see the rogue ships, dark, menacing silhouettes against the backdrop of distant stars. They were closing in, their intentions clear. They weren't just after Lyra. They wanted to capture or destroy her, and with her, any hope of peace for her people. We need to hold them off long enough for reinforcements to arrive, Lyra said, her voice steady but filled with a quiet intensity. Once we make contact with the fleet, we'll have a chance to turn the tide. Jack nodded, his mind sharp and focused despite the chaos around them. He was no longer the unsure farmer he had been when Lyra first arrived on Earth. He had been through too much, seen too much. The stakes were too high now. He had to protect Lyra, protect the future of her people, and somehow protect Earth as well. The rogue ships were almost upon them now, their weapons charging up, ready to strike. Jack could feel the ship vibrating as Lyra adjusted their trajectory, dodging blasts and trying to maneuver them into a more advantageous position. "We need to get closer," Lyra muttered, her fingers dancing over the control panel. "If we stay at this distance, they'll pick us off one by one." Jack gripped the console beside her. "We're not going to let that happen." Lyra shot him a glance, a look of appreciation mixed with something deeper, something Jack couldn't quite name. "I'm glad you're with me, Jack. This won't be easy." The enemy ship fired again, and Jack could hear the crackling sound of energy blasts striking the shields. The ship groaned, but it held strong. Lyra gritted her teeth, pushing the ship to its limits. They were close now, too close to be ignored, and the rogue ships began to move in for the kill. "We'll need to draw them off," Lyra said urgently. "If we don't, they'll bombard the ship and finish us off." Jack thought for a moment. He had never been a soldier, never even been in a real fight. But he knew one thing. He wouldn't let Lyra down. "Leave it to me," he said, his voice steady. "I'll distract them. You get us to the fleet." Lyra looked at him with a mix of surprise and admiration. "What do you mean?" "I've seen enough of their ships to know how they work. If I can get close enough to one of them, I can make sure they focus on me instead of you," Jack said, his voice firm. Without waiting for a response, Jack activated one of the emergency escape pods. It wasn't ideal, but it was the fastest way to get close to the rogue ships. The pod shot off from the main ship with incredible speed, and Jack's heart pounded as the stars streaked by. Behind him, Lyra's ship was continuing its evasive maneuvers, dodging more blasts as they drew the attention of the rogues. Jack knew that once he was in position, he would have only a few precious moments to make a difference. The pod's small engines flared as Jack guided it toward the nearest rogue ship. It was bigger than he expected, its dark hull reflecting the cold light of distant stars. He could see the faint glow of weapons charging up as the enemy ship locked onto his pod. "Here we go," Jack muttered under his breath. With a sudden burst of speed, he veered directly into the path of the rogue ship, getting dangerously close. The ship's sensors picked him up, and he could hear the crew inside shouting, their voices distorted through the pod's comm system. "Incoming. It's a human vessel. Prepare to fire." Jack grinned, adrenaline surging through him. This was it. He had to make them believe he was more than just a distraction. He had to make them think he was a threat. He activated a series of small, hidden explosives he had rigged to the pod. They weren't powerful enough to destroy the ship, but they would send a message. The explosions went off with a deafening boom, and for a split second, the rogue ship's systems faltered, giving Jack the opening he needed. The rogue ship fired, but the blast missed. Jack smiled grimly as he engaged the pod's thrusters, using the chaos to his advantage. He was now a clear target, and the rogues were focused on him. He could see their weapons charging up, but just as they prepared to fire, he saw a bright, blinding light from behind. The reinforcements had arrived. Lyra's ship, now joined by a fleet of ships from her people, burst onto the scene. The ships moved with precision, surrounding the rogue fleet and overwhelming them with their superior firepower. The rogue ships began to retreat, their once strong formation breaking apart in the face of Lyra's forces. "Jack," Lyra's voice crackled through the comms. "You did it. We've got them on the run." Jack let out a breath he didn't realize he had been holding. The adrenaline that had kept him going suddenly began to fade, leaving him feeling drained but victorious. It was nothing. You've got them, Lyra. No, Jack. You gave us the chance we needed. Without you, they would have destroyed us. Jack allowed himself a brief moment of satisfaction, but it was short-lived. He looked around at the scene unfolding before him. The enemy retreating, Lyra's people reclaiming their territory, and the distant, blue planet of Earth still visible in the distance. It wasn't over yet. The war was far from finished, but they had won this battle. Later, as the fleet regrouped and the rogue ships were scattered in the vast expanse of space, Lyra's ship slowly came to a stop near a small, uninhabited moon. She turned to Jack, her eyes filled with a mix of exhaustion and relief. "Thank you, Jack, for everything. I couldn't have done this without you." Jack nodded, his eyes meeting hers. "You don't have to thank me. We're in this together, and we'll finish it together." Lyra smiled, a genuine, heartfelt expression. "I'll hold you to that." As the stars stretched out before them, Jack realized that this was only the beginning. They had won a victory today, but there would be more challenges ahead. They were part of something much bigger now, a fight for survival, for peace, and for a future that had yet to be written. But no matter what came next, Jack knew one thing for sure. He had found his place in the universe. And as the crew of the ship prepared for the next phase of their journey, Jack stood by Lyra, ready to face whatever the stars had in store for them. The dawn of a new adventure had begun.